when you step out onto a plot where you're hunting or fishing, for me, when I wade into the river in my waders and I'm casting out there, I just feel like that's why I'm here. That solace that reaches me is only obtained through being connected to nature.
You made the statement that hunting and fishing is the crux of Ozark food culture.
Yeah.
In your research and you're looking through all these pictures and stories,
Mm-hmm.
did you come across some cool stories or interesting recipes? Or let's just go through some of that stuff of kind of what led to you coming to that conclusion.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, one of the things, we talked about how you put down some corn to like say, hey, this is my land, don't touch it. People also bought into, when they first would move to the Ozarks, they would buy into a hog claim. Don't know, are you guys familiar with the hog claim?
I am, where like a group of people would come together and everyone would have a hog and everyone would kind of share seasonally the butchering of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it might be the coldest day in winter, but they'd all gather together and scald the hog and cut apart, and it's a big messy battle. But I remember interviewing people, them saying that hog killing time was their favorite time of year, because that was when their family would have food for the rest of the winter and the fall, and they got to take home a piece of that hog and they would help their neighbors. But it was a gathering. It wasn't just about the meat. It was about getting together, and they would have a big party afterwards and celebrate just community. So I really love that story. Just
the vision of that is it's so idyllic. Like you wish you could experience it, because you can just envision the kids running around, the wives preparing the midday lunch, and they're all hanging out, and the young men are watching their dads like butcher and scald and all this, and they're
learning how to do it.
they're picking stuff up and learning how to do it. And then it's just family and neighbor and old relative and everybody all in one place, probably drinking a little moonshine.
a little moonshine,
But
never
also,
hurt,
they're just,
.
We're fed through the winter. We're getting time together. I mean, that sounds awesome.
It sounds beautiful. Imagine just your neighborhood. If you and your neighbors did something like that, how it would feel so foreign today.
It would.
But how amazing it would be afterwards. You're like, man, that was so cool. We all came together and did this work together. Now we have food for the winter. Like,
yeah, and everybody had food. Even if we were living in poverty, people still had meat.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we all shared that food, because we shared in the labor of butchering the animal. And so nothing got wasted. It was always appreciated, I definitely love hearing stories about, families coming together around fish and game. Whenever people would go in john boats down the White River, they would, you guys probably know about that. They would charge about $10. Let's see. Bull Shoals Lake also, people would come and they would try to transport their log cabins down through Bull Shoals Lake to get to the other side to put up their log cabins. Settlers would transport log homes and later learn to fish the abundant waters of the White around here. In the 1920s, people actually made $2 to $10 guiding wooden john boats down the river as fishing guides for the tourists that had just arrived by train or the road, and they were looking for the Ozark simple life. So they would get on these john boats. They would build these little log cabins, and they would show them where the bass holes were and all the things, But basically, by the time 1941 rolled around, Bull Shoals Dam was put into place by, I think it was Congress approved construction of it. But World War II delayed the project, so most of the
they didn't end up finishing that until the 50s, right?
Right, but the chutes that released were too cold for most species except for the trout, which were perfect conditions for German brown trout and rainbows, and that's what's left today in the White River and in Bull Shoals.
They would have stocked it then because, all of your smallmouth or what could have been the Neosho.
Yep, you never know.
Back then, although, let's see, that's... maybe not. Maybe it would have still been the smallmouth, but you would have had that, and that would have been like way too cold for the smallmouth and your native fish. So they put in the trout.
It's just interesting that's how we got those here. You know? It's kind of cool. And I will tell you a story that's kind of fun for me. I mean, I've participated in the World Championship Squirrel Cook-Off for 3 years running now, at least, maybe more, maybe 4 or 5. I remember when Joe Wilson came out with the World Championship Squirrel Cook-Off, and Andrew Zimmern had covered it in Bizarre Foods. I asked him, hey, Joe, my book's got to come out. My publishers really want to time it around your cook-off. So could I come and wear an apron and bring my little red wagon and wheel my books around and sell them to everybody? He said, well, sure, Erin. I had participated and won second place in the championship world in the cook-off a few years prior.
Okay.
And I did a Julia Child recipe. It was a little red wine.
Second place is up there.
I
mean, there's a lot. That's a big deal.
It was a big deal. I mean, I'm so grateful that I got to participate and cook. I don't know if I'll ever cook in there again. It's a little intense. I mean, you're making 150 or more samples for people to come by and graze, and then you got to cook for the judges, and it's timed, and you've got to, you don't always have to harvest your own squirrels, but you have to do all the processing right there. You can't do it ahead.
Right.
Yeah. But it was fun. Some good old boys won. I think they did some fried squirrel, and theirs was good too. But we like to think ours was the best.
Yeah.
I was in the only all-female team.
That's
and
cool.
We had a fun time. But as far as the rest, that alone, just being part of the squirrel cook-off is a story in itself. You got to go. I'm sure
great.
you guys have been.
Yeah, we've been several times.
Yeah.
We've had Joe on the podcast too, and it is just the squirrel cook-off is.
Kyle's judged.
Yeah,
nice.
I was judged. Last year or 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Got to try all of the crazy inventions. It was so much fun. I'd never have eaten so much squirrel in my whole life. By the end of the day, I was like, I don't want to eat squirrel for 2 months.
There's a lot of squirrel to be had.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you asked if there was any other stories kind of with the game and fish. I remember whenever I used to go, I still go up to Branson to Silver Dollar City, but there's some old timers there that are part of the Homestead Pickers bluegrass band that plays there.
Okay.
And they remember the Ozarks, even the Missouri Ozarks, which are very similar to Arkansas. Some of the old stories, I asked them if there were any songs, that are reminiscent of Ozark traditions. They said, well, actually, there's one about cooking possum.
Oh.
And I'm like, really? How's it go? And
Are you gonna sing it for us?
I can sing it for you if you want. 2 of the years I've been at the Squirrel Cook-Off, I've been in the band.
Oh,
and
okay.
I'm a singer. I've got a country band.
Oh, cool.
Uh-huh.
All right.
She actually can't sing
You
it.
actually can't sing. If you asked me to sing,
You
I
said
would.
that kind of as a joke. She might actually sing
She's
it.
like, yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah,
Well, I
that's
don't know if
awesome.
this has got to show it off too much, but this is an old folk song.
Okay.
So, all right. Danny Eakin, I should give him credit. He's the one that introduced me to this. He was in the Homestead Pickers. So, bye-bye to that possum, fire that possum down. Bye-bye to that possum when the possum hits the ground. Oh, we'll all have a big dinner when the possum hits the ground. And the rest of it goes on to tell you how to cook the possum
No
in the
way.
lyrics. Yeah, you sugar him up. You put him in a frying pan with some sweet taters and some gravy made from the drippings in the pan. And that is an Ozark dish.
Wow.
If you look through my book, I've literally got pictures of people on a possum hunt. Ain't no joke. Right in the front picture. Kyle probably found it.
Yeah, you did. So I've never eaten possum. I've eaten squirrel, raccoon, and most other things. Never eaten a skunk.
Good for you.
Have you ever had a possum?
Well, I was gonna, but I was talking to this old farmer. He was doing a little chuck wagon dinner over at the Cane Hill Harvest Festival, which you guys got to hit up next September. And they do all the old timey stuff from the 1800s. I was like, what do you think? Should I try some possum? He's like, I've seen too many crawl out of the dead belly of a cow too many times. I don't know if I'm going to do the possum, but I've heard they're good. They taste a little like raccoon. If you've had raccoon, kind of real fatty.
Yeah.
I personally, I would take squirrel over possum any day of the week, you know. But
makes sense.
yeah, it's worth trying, especially if you're in a pinch, you know.
Did you ever come across in any of your research that maybe even didn't make the book? Did you ever come across any squirrel camp stories or deer camp stories, or because again, like the hog scalding, you would have had these large groups of people coming together to go, spend several days out in the woods to go hunting and stuff like that. Did you find some cool pictures and stories about that stuff?
Oh, for sure. I've even got it open to a squirrel camp story from the 1950s, but a family squirrel. One of the guys that's in here might be a kid version of the man who gave me the moonshine recipe.
Okay.
Right? And he and his family, man, that was a thing. They would do squirrel camp and they would go out and they would bring in the food. And he told me that he can remember Grandpa hammering the squirrel brains, getting the brains out of the squirrel. You put it in with some eggs. Mm-hmm. And he said, man, we would just wait. One guy told me when I first got married to my lady, I knew all the squirrels were getting worried because they were like, here's David Lotta. He's got to come. We better run. They knew he was coming. But my favorite kind of squirrel camp story would probably be from George House. He's one of the old timers I interviewed. And he said he was so avid about learning to shoot a gun at the age of 6 years old. He had already worn fingerprints into his single-barreled shotgun.
Oh, really?
Literally, the man lived with that gun. He was out there all the time. But he said it wasn't too unusual for them to bring in 9 or 10 squirrels, just in a given day, and they'd feed the family. And it's funny because a lot of people think, well, maybe, the Ozark folk are the people that started eating these squirrels early on, but even the Native Americans, I came across Native American recipes for squirrel.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was just.
There's specific points that the Osage people would flint nap that were squirrel and bird points.
There you go.
That you can find. If you
that's cool.
If you're good at finding arrowheads, I'm not great, but I found a few, and it's they're tiny.
Yeah,
and it's I know they'd feather them differently, so they'd fly differently. It wouldn't shoot as fast.
Are they blunted at all? Because I know, like today, a lot of the modern broadheads you might find for small game, or they're kind of like the bird points where they've got the prongs coming out, or they're blunted. Do you remember?
Oh, I'd have to look it up.
Yeah,
the ones I found are not blunted, but they're very small.
They're just small. Gotcha.
Yeah. So it'd work for a squirrel.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to hit it with your deer arrow.
Yeah.
You also wouldn't want to work on a deer arrow forever and then shoot it at a squirrel.
No, you wouldn't. Yeah, it doesn't take much to take down a squirrel.
No, it doesn't. No, that's cool. The squirrel camp, I know we like to reminisce on the world past, especially in the Ozarks.
Yeah.
We talk about that a lot, but I grew up squirrel hunting before doing anything else. Like it was before I learned to fish or deer hunt or anything. My granddad was like, "I'm teaching you how to squirrel hunt."
As a lot of young kids probably do, because it's a lot more accessible than going out and doing big game hunting where you have to sit still and be quiet.
And my dad grew up.
You can just go tromping through the forest looking for them.
Yeah.
My dad grew up, the only hunting he did and before he became a young man and took on deer hunting was squirrel hunting with his dad. His dad was a big bass fisherman.
Okay.
But that's what they did. They squirrel hunted. And so my granddad he's actually buried in the cemetery where he grew up squirrel hunting. Like he would squirrel hunt around the edges of it.
Yeah, cool.
And that's where they chose that spot for him. That's where
really
he grew
special.
up squirrel hunting in the mountains. So
some of the best memories people probably have are hunting and fishing, and those early childhood memories, that connection with nature, you can't replace that. And we've got to preserve the land we've got so we can keep creating memories. I know you guys both have kids. You probably are hoping that someday they'll be out there doing stuff.
Oh, they will be.
Absolutely. I do want to ask you this: within the hunting and fishing culture, were women as big of a part of hunting and fishing as the men were? I think today a lot of people think hunting, fishing, they mostly think of men. What about in the past? Was it any different then?
It was definitely different than the stereotype of women not being really involved in the hunting and fishing. Everybody was involved. Obviously the kids, but mom and dad they would know how to shoot a shotgun just as well. I mean, when Henry Rowe Schoolcraft was here, he was having women teach him how to shoot a gun.
Yeah, he has the women making fun of him.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean,
that was the gossip. It was like
this guy can't shoot.
It's crazy. I have in my book, I actually have some old black and whites of women. Like one of the biggest pictures in here is a woman on the edge of a cliff with her gun by herself hunting, right? And on the front cover and inside, I've got a woman that's fishing right there in the river, and there's no one around her. She's on her own. And the picture on page 88 is a woman with her gun, I think, along the Ozark Bluffs on the White River. And this, you can tell by the dress. I mean, this woman would definitely have been... it would have been a way earlier time period, but it was very customary. Probably it's not been, I would say after World War II, possibly a lot of women around here maybe stopped hunting and fishing as much.
Yeah.
But up to that point, it was necessary for everyone to hunt and fish. And so women knew how to shoot a shotgun and skin a buck just as well as the boys.
Yeah.
Run a trot line.
Yeah.
Country girl and boys can survive.
They probably whoop up on some modern day city boys.
It probably would.
Who even hunt and fish. They're like, what are y'all doing?
Yeah, you're doing it all wrong.
Yeah.
I like to think if some of the best recipes came out of these kitchens, these women aren't just, cooking whatever's been processed. They probably do most of the processing themselves. I'm sure the man's probably just dragging it up on the porch and being like,
yeah.
Here, you take care of it. Yeah, I'm going to go again. There's some funny stories even of, I had a lady that got chased by a bear. One of the stories in here, she was out berry picking after her husband had ran off. They were building a cabin. He took the only gun and went and treated a squirrel. but she had the dogs. But she was like, I'm just going to go out and see what he's up to. And on the way, she came across some blackberries, but she had to totally defend herself against the bear that also wanted the blackberries.
No way.
Yeah. She had a full apron full, and she's picking them all to bake a pie, right? And she just goes running off. I mean, the guy that told me the story said she lit out.
Lit out.
She hit the trail.
Yeah.
So she's just running, Miss Nancy, and she's dropping blackberries along the way, thinking that'll, satiate the bear. But all it's doing is creating a little gingerbread trail all the way back to the cabin.
I just got to keep following this girl.
I mean, yeah. So she's like scaling over the walls that aren't even finished, going over the edge of the cabin. There's no roof on it yet. They're still building it. And the bear's coming right behind her, coming into the cabin. And that's not going to be a good thing. And I know that we're all conservationists here, but she needed to do some self-protection here. So when the bear's foot went through the chinking, she grabbed up the broad axe and she took out part of its toes. And that discouraged the bear, right? Simple.
Right, simple.
I love it when I get to interview people telling these stories because they use the current vernacular, and that just makes it all the better.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a good story. That is a really good one.
Yeah, we got some funny ones. I got all kinds of stories. Hunting and fishing, definitely, like you guys said, crux of the cuisine. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And all the pictures, yeah.
For sure. Well, and if it's the backbone, hunting and fishing, I mean that makes sense even for your work put into it versus your return.
Yeah.
You're catching fish and killing game is where it's at.
Yeah.
What about the offshoot of that? What are the most popular Ozark foraged foods?
Oh, I mean, well,
covered
morels.
blackberries, morels.
Yeah.
But what are some of the ones? And I guess sorghum was planted.
Sure.
What are some of the ones that are the most popular, the most famous, the ones that are maybe most well documented, and then maybe some of the ones in the Ozarks that people may not know about?
Yeah. So nobody knows about possum grapes, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're just like a wild grape that grows out in the woods. They're hard to find. Everybody knows about elderberries, but they don't know how to harvest them. But if you do that, just clip off the whole branch. Don't bother to pick all the little berries. You'll be there till next year.
Mm-hmm.
Morels. Yeah, we know about them. Do we know where to find them? Not everybody does. I can't tell you where my spots are because it's super secret.
Oh, yeah.
So that's everybody who
I will die before I tell you my morels.
who finds morels. That's how it goes. Like, I'd like to learn how to do it. It's like, yeah, I'm not gonna tell you.
You're like,
Yeah.
okay, good luck.
Yeah, you
Go figure it out.
I can tell you the north side of a hill in a sycamore grove. Kick up the leaves. If you do find them, please use a knife and remove them carefully so you don't take the whole thing out.
Yep.
Tap out the seeds so it replenishes your crop, and you'll know where to go back to next year.
Don't put them in a plastic bag.
Yes.
Put them in a mesh bag or carry them out in your hand.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. So I would say morels are probably one of our most popular items. I mean, you'll see these come out. I'm a chef. I see these I go to high-end restaurants when I travel, and you'll see morels pop up on even those 5-star restaurants.
Oh, yeah.
They want the morels. They're hard to get. They're like a truffle.
Yeah.
But for the Ozarks,
There's morel finding Facebook groups.
Yeah.
That have huge numbers,
groups.
like
Oh
huge
my
amounts
goodness.
of people.
When I started finding some of those groups on Facebook, I was like, oh my goodness.
People wanna
These
find
people
them.
are fanatics about it. And I love it. And then I finally found some morels, and I'm the same way now. I
Yep.
can't wait for the spring.
Tastes like a steak, right? You
Yeah,
can
they're
season them up
delicious.
just the same way. They're just little bites of goodness. Black walnuts. So you can buy black walnuts at the store, but right now, this time of year and maybe a month ago, the black walnut trees are dropping. But our Arkansas black walnuts are really special compared to English black walnuts and other things. So that's one. Those are easy to find,
What
but
do
do you know
with
how
a
to
black?
harvest
I was going to say,
them?
what do you do with a black walnut?
You can get a hammer out and go to town.
Yep.
You can
They
run them over
normally-
with your car.
They normally drop with the green still on them. Is
Yeah.
that right? Okay.
That's right. So you want to wait till that kind of rots off a bit, and then it gets that hard shell, and that's when you're going to go ahead and go over them with your car if you want to get crazy, or you can use a hammer, but you just cannot crack them with the normal cracker.
Yeah.
So it's a labor of love.
Then do you roast them?
I would roast them, or you could just eat them raw, but roasting them always imparts a better flavor on any nut, just like chestnuts roasting over an open fire, But yeah, so you could do that. And then other good harvested foods, sassafras. A lot of people don't know about how to find it on the side of the roads. In the springtime, you're going to see it growing, but if you harvest the roots and make it into a tea, it's a good springtime blood thinner. Little known fact. Dandelion weed can be eaten and used, made into wine.
Yeah.
You get that? You probably have that grown in your yard
Totally.
all the time, right? And a little thing that we have here that people don't know what to do with are the what are the purple trees? They're not rose. It's not rose hips. It is red buds. You know, I've taught some cooking classes at the Ozark Community Gardens. I've harvested in the springtime, you know, those really beautiful red bud trees that are really purple. You can actually harvest all of those buds.
And do what with them?
Well, you can make them to a jam or jelly, and it's amazing.
No way.
Oh,
Really?
yeah. So,
Are they sweet naturally?
yeah, they are. You put a little lemon juice, a little sugar. You treat it like you would any sort of other jelly. You're not actually eating the buds, but you're making it almost like an extract with that,
Sure.
and then mixing that with sugar and letting that congeal.
Okay.
But if you do that, it has more vitamin C than an orange. You can also eat rose hips that way, but everybody knows about rose hips. But a lot of people don't know that the red bud trees actually, before they start to bloom out and green out, you can harvest all of those buds.
I'm
Yeah.
so glad you told me
I
that.
know that.
I have a red bud tree and a black walnut tree.
Yay!
And dandelions in my yard all the
Well,
time.
look, you know,
So
we're
it's-
coming to your house for foraging
Yeah.
dinner. You
Yeah.
can
I
make
mean,
your own wine,
got to.
jellies. But yeah, it gives it a nice little purple color, so
That's
it's really
cool.
pretty. But what I would do is I would harvest your, just do those and set those jellies back in the cabinet. I think I can get you a recipe. But if you use any of my jelly recipes, it'll set up the same. I've got an apple jelly one here.
Mhm.
But you could set that back and give them away as Christmas gifts.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
I didn't know you
And
could eat those.
I
Yeah.
didn't either.
You could totally eat those. And then,
Admittedly, my foraging game is pretty weak.
I feel
no
like
worries.
that's both of us.
Yeah.
It's like we've
Morels,
we know the morels,
persimmons,
and
blackberries,
Yeah.
blackberries, apples. Well, those are not really found in the wild that much, but
mulberries.
Mulberries, sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, those are probably. That's about all I got.
Yeah.
How about poke salad, boys?
Nope.
Okay, so poke salad is everywhere. Everywhere. You wouldn't, once you know what it looks like, you're going to be like, dang, that was growing in my back field. It grows in gardens, but what it is, it gives off a purple berry. And once it ages with that berry, you don't want to mess with it. But before that, because the berries are poisonous.
Mhm.
Okay. But before that,
Don't eat the berries.
don't eat the berries.
but
Don't do it.
in subtitles. They are poisonous.
Yes. But if you can wash and boil the leaves of poke salad, it makes a really, it's almost like spinach. So it's a lot of like those heavy washes, like mustard greens
Yeah.
kind of thing, right? So people were so subsistence focused here in the Ozarks. We would harvest everything that we could possibly eat, and that was one of them. And so poke salad, it's really tasty with some bacon grease, you know, or bear grease in our
Yep.
case, right? If you got some bear grease handy, you could cook it up with that and little bits of bacon or maybe some bear pieces and bear meat, and that would be a salad. And also, people would. Do you guys know about pot liquor?
Hmm.
Okay, so you know about that.
Well, I don't know about.
Yeah, you do.
Do I?
You hung out with Cooking with Cajun, Audrey Dizelle. You know all about pot
Okay.
liquor.
Yeah.
How do you make it?
Well,
though?
you cook down your wild greens, whatever they may be. That could be your lamb's quarter
His
that we
was a
used to
collard
use.
green, right?
Collard
That he
greens.
was-
Yeah.
Those are a little easier to get a hold of if you go to the grocery
Mhm.
store. But if you were going out in the wild, you could do your dandelion
Mhm.
leaves as well. But you're going to cook them in a soup kettle till it gets real peppery. You got a little extra pepper in there. You cook them down. You pull out the greens. That what's left is the pot liquor, the liquid.
Mhm.
You know, but people used to socialize and they would be like, I traded a dishpan of flour for some pot liquor
Yep.
because they were needing the nutrients from the greens, you know, in a really,
It's like a stock or
Yeah.
broth.
it is.
Yeah.
And
It is.
It's called liquor, but is it alcoholic at all?
No.
It's not. Okay.
People used to call whatever the leftover like meat juices were
Yeah,
the liquor
liquor.
of the animal.
Got it.
Now
Okay.
you got a new word. You could spell it a double K, you know, Likaer.
Yeah.
'Cause that's how we spell things in the Ozarks, or just like Liqueur if you really want to get correct.
I only
But-
remember that because Audrey kept saying, you got to have some of this pot liquor. And I was sitting there thinking, too, like, there's no way this is actually liquor.
Is this
Yeah,
a real
like,
thing?
I
Like,
remember
I
trying
watched
the
him put this
greens.
stuff in the kettle. Like, what's going on here?
I don't think I had any of the liquor. I think I just ate the greens. I don't remember having.
Hmm. I was
Mhm.
drinking a cup of it.
Were you really?
Oh, it's
I
good
need my
stuff.
nutrients, man.
Yeah, it's
You were
kind of like the
deficient.
modern, you know, like the modern
Redneck.
protein drink,
Yeah.
right? You know, or the old fashioned one, you know. And then, of course, you know, you guys probably know how to trace honeybees, right?
Only because I listened to your interview. And,
Okay.
But I think that's a great story if you want to share it.
All right.
You said trace?
Trace them. Yeah. As in know where their path is, you know. So it's the old fashioned
Oh, yeah,
term.
Please do tell us
Okay.
that.
Find where they live.
All right. So if you want to go bee tracing, okay,
Okay.
which we should just bring this back, boys. We should totally
We
bring this
should.
back. Okay. Here's what you do. You want to mix up some sugar water. Now, my favorite way, and the old farmer's kind of way, is you mix it up in your mouth and then you just spray it all over the bushes and you wait. and you wait for a honeybee to come along. Or you could put it out in a little dish, just mixture of honey, of sugar and water, or honey and water if you got some. Once a bee finds that, it'll take every bit of it that it can possibly hold on its little body. Bees are amazing. They're my favorite insect. And it will circle, circle, circle all the way up, elevate itself up as high as it can go, and it will beeline right back to the hive.
Which is where you get that term.
That's where you get the term. Yep. Usually the hive's within 200 or so yards, so you don't have too far to go from a bee. They don't travel too far away from the hive, or they get lost and then they die because they can't. Without the queen, they all go. That's why you never want to lose a queen in your hive. So they're not going to go too far away from home, if you know what I mean. But once they find that, they'll beeline. You follow that sucker all the way back. Try not to run into any trees on the way. Lots of farmers back in the day would get black eyes, broken legs, trying to
They're
follow.
running while looking
They're
up.
running, looking at the bee, and there's a tree stump. I forgot about that field,
No
or they fall in a
way.
hole. But yeah, once they did that, they'd know where the beehive was. They would bee course it. And the cool thing was you would trade the knowledge of a bee course for a plowhead, sometimes even a steer. If you had a cow and they had a bee course, it might be worth it to trade it for a little bit of the knowledge of where to get your short sweetening, because your wife would be thanking you because you wouldn't have to pay for sugar that year. You'd know where the honey was.
That's incredible.
And that
That is
honey
so cool.
would feed your family not just for that season, but for maybe 5 or 10 years
Yeah.
if you took care of the hive and you made sure you didn't rob it too much and you left some honey for them to eat because that's their food source. Then they're never going to leave that hive, and they'll come back year after year after year.
Now, are beehives in the Ozarks what you'd think of in like a Pooh Bear cartoon?
Oh, yeah, for
Or
sure.
is it deep in some tree hollow somewhere?
Yeah,
and
they can also be bee gums.
Yeah.
They're hidden in a gum tree
Yeah.
or any kind of tree. They're in any little holler. I've seen them. Man, they'll go anywhere.
Yeah.
They'll make their little hive or their little colony. And a lot of people around here now have the bee boxes.
Yeah.
Which is cool. I don't know if I personally prefer them just to be in their own little tree. It just feels a little more natural to me. But there's only certain times a year you can harvest that honey. There's an old fashioned Ozark saying, a swarm of bees in May is worth a stack of hay, but a swarm of bees in June is worth a silver spoon, and a swarm in July is worth a green fly. As in, not worth it. So you got to harvest your honey. Your honey's got to be best in May and June, and after that, they're running out. So just leave them alone.
Yeah.
And let them just take care of their own. So that's your window. So you get your honey, and then the rest of the year you'd be surviving on your sorghum
Gotcha.
for your sweetening.
That's so fascinating. The term beeline. It's stuff like that you're like, you don't ever think about where we get those terms until you hear these old stories in history.
Yep.
You're like, oh yeah, well that makes total sense.
Makes total sense. Who knew?
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That that guy over there made a beeline for that location.
The bathroom.
And
Exactly.
yeah, you think, of course,
Like,
that makes
dude's
sense.
not stopping anywhere.
But now
He's
you
going
understand.
straight there.
It's a beeline to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Focused.
Yeah.
Now you understand. I did not know that.
Yeah,
Truly.
love that.
That is
Yeah.
a bee's line back to
Yeah.
its home. That's
It's
and
crazy.
you followed it.
And I feel like the more we dig into history, the more we uncover those little things, the origins of our language, why we have food, why we cook it the way we do. Those little things, they have a reason, and I was all set about just uncovering that reason.
That's so fun.
Yeah.
That's cool. That is
Yeah.
really cool. So talk to me about today. So we've talked history.
Sure.
We've looked back. Today, I know that you do food tours around
Yeah.
Northwest Arkansas, and you take people to different places to try different food. And you've obviously done a lot of this research today in modern times. How do you still see a lot of this history and culture surviving? If you do, does it persist to today, and how so?
It's, a big part of, saving a culture is the preservation of it and the conservation of it, appreciating the truth of the history and knowing it all. So information is key, right? We've got to get information out to the kiddos about where our food comes from. So that's why I do a lot of talks for kids' schools. I judge kids' cooking competitions and I teach cooking classes just so I can get that information out. What you guys are doing with your kids and your families, hunting and fishing, that's a big part of that information process too. We have to teach people to appreciate where we come from first, and then they can learn the why, later. And so the way I see it, not everybody's got to become a hunter and fisherman. And probably, let's be honest, for us hunting, maybe we don't want everybody to be a hunter, right? We need to keep some of our spots to ourselves. And I know when I go out fishing, I don't necessarily want somebody in my part of the river when I get there at first light. I want to have that spot to myself. But for those that aren't hunting and fishing, I think the key is going to directly as much to the source of the food as we can. And that will preserve a little bit of the Ozark cuisine in our culture. When we go to restaurants, if we're not demanding a tomato on our hamburger in winter, then we're trying to actually order in season, right? So I think people need to change their expectations about what people all the time say, I want to eat local. I want to eat local. I hear this as a chef and a food tour guide all the time. But if you want to eat local, that means you can't eat a tomato in December because it's not local.
Yeah.
It's being shipped in. And you want to go to restaurants and ask for those restaurants to serve local goods, but they've got to have a relationship with the farmer and the purveyor. There are a ton of farmers and maybe some hunters and fishermen that would love to sell their catfish to the local market. Maybe they have some farm-raised catfish that they've got out in their ponds and they have enough that they could sell. But there has to be an interest and there has to be the infrastructure to facilitate the transportation between it. A farmer, a hunter, a fisherman, they don't always have the time, especially farmers, man, they don't have the time to harvest their crops and then bring them to the restaurants.
Right.
So we've got to have some kind of connector. I think we need like a food coordinator for Northwest Arkansas. I feel like that has always been a need so we can have more local food that isn't brought in from less than more than 30 miles away. We have enough stuff going around here. We just don't have the infrastructure in place to make that connection happen. Also, farmers markets. We all love going to the farmers markets. We take our dogs, but really supporting farmers markets means we support local people and what they're doing. So supporting that, even if we have to pay, $1 more for our head of lettuce, it's probably worth it to buy it from that little old lady down the road and to buy it from the supermarket. So when we can do that, that makes great strides towards saying, this is what we are behind. We're behind the conservation of food and we're putting our dollars behind it.
Yeah.
We also just have to, again, change our expectations. So when we order food at restaurants, we should be ordering things that are in season. Maybe people don't know what that is. Maybe the information piece has to come out, but restaurants have to take the willingness to make a hyper seasonal menu, which not all restaurants will do that, but local ones might because they have the ability to design their own menu. They're not being run by a big corporate franchise. When I do food tours, we only go to local places.
Yeah.
Because I want that for my clients. I want them to have the chance to taste truly local food, and I want those chefs to be rewarded. So where we give our business, whether it's at a farmer's market or a restaurant when we go out to dinner with our family, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Got to be really intentional with that. It'll pay off.
Yeah.
But we all have to take little strides,
Interesting. I hadn't really thought about ordering in season or anything like that. Is you almost kind of think like, oh, well, if I want a burger and I want a tomato on it, I'm just going to ask for a tomato. But
sure,
you can make a difference, it sounds like, by not asking for the tomato or just being like, yeah, I don't need it. Like, if it's not from around here,
yeah,
I'm good with that.
Or supporting the restaurants that specifically do have a hyper seasonal menu, doing that reresearch.
Yeah.
And saying, hey, going into those places like the Farmer's Table does that in Fayetteville. They do all hyper seasonal.
Okay.
There's a few other kind of gourmet restaurants that are more hyper seasonal focused. The Hive used to be that way in Bentonville, a little bit more so with Matthew McClure behind the helm.
Yeah.
I think Rob Nelson at Tuscan Trotter does some hyper seasonal things. He's trying to support local farmers. I mean, the lamb he buys is from my friend's farm out in Cave Springs.
Yeah.
So when you do those strides and people support those businesses, that tells them, okay, I can keep going. I'm not going to give up on this dream. And when restaurants start to see that influx, then other restaurants take notice. They're like, ooh, maybe we should do what Rob's doing,
Yeah. Do you see with some of the recipes that you've got in the book that you found in your research, do you still see a lot of those recipes that are unique to the Ozarks or at least very prominent in the Ozarks still popping up in some of these restaurants?
I do. I see sort of a nod, Kyle, if you will.
Okay.
What I see is we're taking the classics of the Ozarks, but we're combining them with a twist, like a fusion. And I think that's really the way the Ozark cuisine has to go. As a chef,
Why is that?
Because we don't have a populace that is all from the Ozarks living here anymore. We have people from New York City and California, and they're going to expect some of the high-end flavors. So you have people that are making fried chicken with caviar and champagne, and that's working, So we're taking some nods. That was from Barclita in Bentonville. They did that. It was really, really good.
Yeah.
So taking some twists and elevating our cuisine. So I think that's the way we have to go with it. We're still going to have good old standbys like Montenay chicken, still doing that great all-you-can-eat meat.
God bless
chicken
my
dinner.
chicken.
God bless him, everyone. I tried to get David Myers when I interviewed him to give me that fried chicken recipe. He's like, girl, you're not even getting to know what bean I put in that bean soup.
Oh, the soup is so good.
Yeah. But he gave me the blackberry cobbler recipe. It's in the book, verbatim. It feeds about 20, so you're good.
All right.
You're
Makes
welcome.
sense. Family style dinner restaurant.
Absolutely.
You got to feed about 20.
Yeah, so you guys can use that for Thanksgiving. I got the wooden spoon apple pie recipe verbatim. That's in there. But, at the end of the day, these restaurants are there are got to be still those good old country, high South kind of home cooking kind of places. But everywhere else, if we can take fried chicken and elevate it to Korean fried chicken like they do at Leverett Lounge, then we got something, right? Yeah. So we're going to take things that are the crux. Maybe someday somebody's got to do something fancy with hominy. I'm still waiting for that one.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if we don't elevate it, we're going to lose our audience, because all the Ozark folk, we might go out to dinner once in a while, but some of these newcomers, they want to go out to dinner all the time, and they're the ones that are also supporting our economy. And just the demographic of the Ozarks is changing. It's not all people that grew up around here like you guys and me. There's people moving here from all over. We've got to almost cater to their taste buds, but show them something new.
Yeah. There's also some practical game laws around why you can't go straight Ozark.
Yeah.
You can't serve venison.
Yeah.
Right.
Some restaurants can, I guess. Well, yeah, they can. They source it from Texas in a farm.
Yes, but they're not Arkansas.
Yeah, it's on
right?
Arkansas deer.
Yeah.
And you're not going to serve skunk or raccoon or possum.
Right,
exactly. Safety laws, maybe.
And some of them might be like the supply. Like maybe we want to have, I talked to Leo Orpin and the guys at Black Apple in Springdale, the cidery, our first cidery. I'm like, guys, do you guys have all Ozark or Arkansas apples in their cider? They're like, no, Erin, our demand is way too high.
Yeah.
We can, and we have taps all around Northwest Arkansas at most bars for our hard cider, and it's so popular. There's no way we have enough apples here to make all the cider that we produce. So we have to ship in juice from Washington, Oregon, everywhere that we can get it. We ferment it here in Arkansas, but as far as, where all the apple juice originally is from, it's not all Arkansas apples. So we may not have enough to supply the demand.
Yeah.
So we have to get creative.
Yeah.
But we can still give a nod to the traditional ingredients, using them in new ways.
Well, and you can always gather your family around a traditional Ozark meal.
Yeah, you totally can.
Yeah, you can always
cook that way,
do
hunt
it
that way,
yourself.
forage that way, do it yourself.
Yeah.
And we kind of need to do that, because if people forget how to cook, as the world continues to change and it gets dicey at times, you're going to need to know how to cook a home-cooked meal. And you really need to be able to control, I think, where your food comes from to regulate the health of your family. You don't need all those pesticides and all those things going into it. If you can garden, if you have the time, great. If you can hunt and fish and you have the time, do it. It's got your health will thank you for it. You guys, we might live a couple years longer just through eating hunted game and
Just
fish.
maybe.
Maybe.
We'll see. Or we'll die falling out of a tree stand.
But it'll be a good death,
I'll wear my
right?
harness.
Whenever I'm out trout fishing in Colorado, I always think, well, if a mountain lion gets me out here, it'll be a good death.
Truly. There's sometimes, I'm roaming around the woods. It's like, if something gets me, it's gonna be a fine way to go.
It'll be fine.
Truly, it'll be a fine way to go.
Yeah, for sure.
Let me ask you this. This is maybe a hard question to answer. You mentioned taking something that is a traditional Ozark food or cuisine, putting a twist on it, making it, interesting to someone else who maybe didn't grow up the same way, eating the same stuff. Where do you personally, where do you draw the line of like, there are certain things that I will not touch or change, of like, this is Ozark cuisine through and through. And I don't care if I add some Asian zing to this, that it may be a little bit better, but like, I'm going to the traditional way that it was cooked and prepared.
Yeah.
Where do you personally draw the line?
Oh, that's a great question, Kyle. I mean, man, when I teach cooking classes, I teach at Honeycomb Kitchen Shop sometimes, and I'll make my cornbread. I'm like, y'all, I don't care who you are. We're cooking it in an iron skillet. We are not doing cornbread and anything else. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And we're not putting sugar in it. Maybe just if we do, it'll be like a little bit, like a pinch, just to bring out the corn flavor. But we're not doing a mushy cornbread. It's got to be a nice dry cornbread. We're using the oil. We're going to get that crispy edge on it. And you can't do that with any other vessel but the iron skillet. So for me, frying chicken as well has to be done in an iron skillet, and you need lard or shortening,
Bear grease.
Bear grease would be great. If I have any of that handy, I'm using bear grease.
I'm going to get you some.
Okay.
I'm going to get you some.
I would so love that. So you got to have that. I feel like those things you can't compromise on. I definitely think whenever you're doing pickles, anytime you're pickling something, you got to take your time. I really feel like pickling items almost always has to be from the garden, especially garden tomatoes. There's just the flavor so much better than anything you can get at the store these days, even at the high-end supermarkets, But if you don't want to compromise on, on Ozark food, then definitely you're going to need to do your chicken. There are a couple people that might suggest that you could do your chicken in the oven, but I really think you got to fry it.
Yeah.
I
would agree with that.
I think the flavor on it's just better.
It takes a little more time. It's a little bit more of a mess and all that comes with that, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Anytime I do my apple butter, I do it in a large batch and I feed the family, I feed everybody. I don't just cook apple butter. If you can get a hold of a copper kettle, it's even better. It's got to taste better when you make apple butter and you got to grind it down. Let's see. I also think you probably need to know how to make some good biscuits. And biscuits and chocolate gravy, I know. Doesn't sound too healthy, but chocolate gravy is totally an Ozark thing.
Really?
It's like a dessert. But you won't find it anywhere else, most of the places in even the South. I'm not sure why it's just here.
Yeah.
But I've never found it anywhere else.
Interesting.
That was one of the reasons I've sold this book so well. In addition to the cornbread recipe, people found that this chocolate gravy was a recipe they couldn't find anywhere. But their grandpa used to make it, or their great-grandpa. And so, it's been since the early 1900s, chocolate gravy's been, made the traditional way. So it would be a almost like served with breakfast instead of biscuits and regular gravy. And
a breakfast item.
Yes.
Chocolate gravy.
A chocolate gravy.
Rolling Pin Cafe in Fayetteville has some killer chocolate gravy.
Nice.
Do they really?
Yep.
Okay.
Never had it.
That's what I grew up eating after we were squirrel hunting.
I've never had it.
Okay.
That was our weekend a lot of times with my granddad.
And I've got some Depression era pies in here, but I would never substitute like an alternate, like buttermilk pie and, vinegar pie. Those are pies that you got to make them the traditional recipe. Like we were talking about, we're kind of both cooks, so we like to improvise, but those I would probably stick to the recipe.
Stick to it, yeah.
Is the buttermilk pie an Ozarky thing or just a Southern thing?
It might just be a Southern thing on the buttermilk because I feel like I've seen those in Georgia, Alabama, but it would have been a Depression era pie whenever people couldn't afford fruit.
Yep.
Right. So they're making do with whatever they have because they've still got to feed the family. They're using basic pantry ingredients.
Yeah.
Vinegar pie especially is that way because there's literally no fruit in it at all.
Yeah. Rob Connolly was mentioning that when we were talking to him. He was like, vinegar pies.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've ever had one.
Oh, well, we'll have to make one. I mean, it's not going to be as tasty, let's say, as a regular fruit pie.
Sure, yeah.
But in the Depression era, it was just a way to get something sweet in somebody's belly without spending too much money, right?
They were eating
good.
salmon patties and vinegar
pie. My cousin moved to New York to take a big fancy job 5 or 6 years ago, right after he got married. And he calls me after he'd been there for about a year, and he goes, dude, you won't believe this. It's like, what's going on? He said, me and my wife, we showed up to this high-dollar fancy pie restaurant in New York City. And the pie that was selling like hotcakes that everybody was raving about, the chef or the baker was touting it as like original recipe, never been done before, whatever. And he's like, I got to try this. He eats it. He's like, bite number one is like, this is a darn buttermilk pie. There's nothing new about this, but it was just a foreign idea.
Yeah.
And that neighborhood, that corner of New York.
Didn't know what it was.
Did not know what it was. And he was like, dude, it was a buttermilk pie.
It was no big deal.
And that baker was making a killing per slice because it was...
Man, think about it. It's probably costing cents per slice to make.
Yeah, I know. It's probably the cheapest pie that they make, and they're selling it like crazy.
Absolutely.
But it was hilarious hearing from him coming from this area going, dude, it's just a buttermilk pie. Like, I was all excited. That's all it was.
It's funny like how we grow up here in the South or in Arkansas, and we have sometimes foods that are kind of anomalies, to the rest of the United States, and we're just kind of they're just standard, like grits, for example. The guy I'm dating is from New Mexico, and he's like, we didn't grow up with grits. I'm like, I bet you didn't, but we sure did. You remove the endosperm off the corn kernel and to make it into hominy, you grind it down. I mean, it's a process.
Yeah.
But you were asking me, Kyle, if there's something I stick to. I won't buy any of their grits, but War Eagle Mills. And that's a mill out in Rogers, and they still grind their own cornmeal semi-daily, and they do their own grits as well. So that's pretty good stuff, That's cool. Going right to the source.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It tastes better, too.
Yes, it does. War Eagle's a cool place. Okay. Oh, I mentioned this at the beginning of the episode. And I want to come circle back to it. Venison recipes.
Yes.
So we've got guys now, they've been hunting for probably since September, like us, and they've probably taken a deer, maybe two.
Cool.
Maybe they've tagged out, maybe not. But there's people who have venison in their freezers or in their fridges, and they've always done the same recipe.
Yeah.
And they're looking for something new, something different. What's some go-to venison recipes that maybe is a nod to the old ways of doing things, or maybe they're just completely new? What are some recipes that they could try out?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Well, we all know that you boys and gals that are hunting, you already know what to do with the back strap and the tenderloin, so I wasn't going to go into that. But if you need recipes, let me know. I kind of cook it up like a filet iron skillet on those. But as far as using the rest of the animal, that's where I would like to just give you guys some new ideas.
I would love to hear it.
Okay. So that world championship winning squirrel meatloaf recipe that won 2014, you could easily substitute the shanks and or sorry, not the shanks, the trim and grind it, right?
And you've got that in here, the squirrel meatloaf one.
It's on page 97. And I'm telling you, you could either make it with part squirrel, part venison. I mean, you need the equivalent of 26 ounces of meat, right?
I love how you split it up into 3 gray squirrels and 2 fox squirrels.
Well, just to be clear.
That cracks me up.
It just adds a little bit of extra, like a variety in the flavor of the meat, right?
Yeah.
The grays and the foxes.
I saw the biggest fox squirrel I've ever seen the other day. This thing was the size of a football.
Oh, no.
This was 2 days ago.
Did you get it?
Oh, I love it.
No, I didn't. I was deer hunting.
Okay. Well, next time you're deer hunting, you can be thinking about this squirrel meatloaf recipe, being like, I can do me some venison meatloaf. So if you use that trim or that grind and you grind it down, you could even put it with part like pork fat back, or you could do a little bit of bacon in there if you're going to cook it all the way through, which you would with the meatloaf. I just don't know. You're probably doing some sausage with some of your grind, but you can combo that with apples and yellow onions, local apples if you can get them, sage, egg, cornbread crumbs. So that's all Ozark Cuisine combined into one amazing meatloaf that will probably win your family championship cooking competition, right?
That's awesome.
So use that venison up, use that trim, that grind, all those little pieces you don't know what to do with. You can grind those up, make those into that meatloaf, and then you can set that back. You can freeze it. Now, you might want to serve it on the next page with an Ozark Old Fashioned. That's the only cocktail recipe in the book besides the moonshine, which makes enough for a big party. And invite me, please. But that Ozark Old Fashioned, instead of doing you could do I had a squirrel bacon lollipop I considered doing with that. But what you could do is make up your little venison jerky, have that as your little garnish in the drink, right?
There you go.
A little venison
Now
jerky.
you're thinking.
Stir up that whiskey, get some good whiskey, Cocktails are only as good as what you put in them. And if you want to sweeten it, instead of using a sugar cube, use some Ozark sorghum and sweeten that. So use the sorghum as the sweetener in your old fashioned.
Where can I buy some Ozark sorghum?
You can get it out at Cane Hill. They sell it every year at the Harvest Festival and at the local museum store.
Okay,
right
here we
there.
go.
What's your go-to whiskey for an Ozark Old Fashioned? What would you use?
I would probably, I love Bullet.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Simple.
Buffalo Trace if you can get it.
Okay.
Now, Macadoodles out in Missouri gets about one shipment a month, and if you go at the right time, you can nail it.
Yeah.
We don't have any good whiskey distillers besides maybe Fox. Is it Fox Trail over in Rogers? But I don't know if they sell. I think they do sell their bottles of whiskey. Oh, there's an excellent moonshine place out in Missouri too, in Jane, Missouri, that you could probably sub in a little lighter side for this Ozark Old Fashioned. They even do a whiskey, and that is just right over the border, Missouri.
Yeah, cool.
So, but yeah, if you want to go local, you could probably do that. And then, as far as the rest of the animal, if you turn to the wine chapter, I've got a recipe for an old fashioned umido that came over from Italy. And umido, and it's basically like a red wine, slow braised, low and slow kind of dish, which you could use the shanks in because you got a really tough cut of meat. So that umido's on page 77, and instead of beef round or chicken, you're going to braise and slow cook almost to a ragu that those
those shanks.
Venison shanks with some onion, celery, like a mirepoix, and garlic with some sage, which will go great. You guys could probably grab some sage while you're out hunting. Just grab some sage. Wherever you harvest the animal, there's probably got to be greens nearby that you can use in your dish.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times the things that taste best in a dish are harvested from the area where they grew up.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, probably
That's
just find
awesome.
you some wild sage, get you some tomato sauce. I'd sub in red wine for the white wine. You can slow braise that. Basically, you're kind of cooking the meat down and with the oil on all sides, and you're going to cook the onion, celery, garlic, and sage with some butter or maybe some more of that bear grease or a little. You won't have much fat from the animal if it's venison because they're so lean.
Right.
But you brown that. You add your tomato sauce, your red wine, probably from Post Family.
There you
right?
go. Yep.
And you're going to add enough water to cover the meat and just let it cook slow and slow in the crock pot. One other recipe that I wanted to tell you about, besides that, just to make it a full nose to tail experience, is why don't you go ahead and use your bones and make a bone broth. And use that bone broth for everything from that polenta that would go really well with this umado on the preceding page. Instead of beef bouillon, use your bone broth.
Oh, that's cool.
Wouldn't that be good?
Yeah.
And picks that with that cornmeal that you harvested, that you got over at War Eagle. You put your bone broth in there. You make that polenta on page 76, and you put that nicely underneath that umado, and it'll set up in a jiffy. The umado takes all day. The polenta takes 5 minutes. So, pick your order.
Mm-hmm.
But those together make a perfect Italian Ozark meal, right? And that bone broth doesn't go wasted because you're trying to introduce the kids to cook, and you start making that venison noodle soup instead of beef or chicken noodle soup.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to love that.
Can you freeze bone broth?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I freeze it all the time. And if you really want to, you could freeze it in an ice cube tray. So that way you can add in just a couple
as you
tablespoons as a time as you need
That's
it.
a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
And you can cook it up with some Pose's pasta from Tawnytown.
Yes. Their
That pasta
pasta's
rocks.
so good. And I got a chicken soup recipe on page 80, so you could use your bone broth in for that instead. So all those recipes are from the book, but that'll cover nose to tail because you guys have already got the backstrap and the tenderloin covered.
Yeah.
And just on the meatloaf, you said 26 ounces of equivalent. That's what you're saying is venison. You're saying sub that for venison.
And you're going to have a lot more than that. So maybe you could make a few meatloafs.
Yeah.
Cook them, set them back in the freezer, forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
Forget about it.
Forget about it.
And then, in a month, whenever family's hungry for venison, you've got all that set back. I mean, all this stuff, guys, you could set back. And these are unique but truly Ozark type of recipes using your venison.
I love the meatloaf idea. I think that will be something I try very soon.
Yes, let me know how it goes. And if you end up, being shy, just use a little rabbit in with or rabbit if you got it.
Yeah.
Or pork.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Heck yeah.
Man, that's awesome.
This is fun.
Yay!
Oh, I did want to ask you one more thing on venison. I've never actually canned or pickled venison.
Sure.
But I know that was something that people used to do to preserve.
Yes.
What's the basic kind of walk me through the steps of that?
Sure. And that's all in the canning and pickling chapter in case you forget any of this. It's all in the front cover. The basic concept of preserving meat is in there.
Okay.
It's applying, in this case, to hominy, but you can apply it with meat as well.
Okay.
So basically what you're going to do is you're going to cube up your venison, right? You're going to go ahead and put it in your probably quart jars is what I would recommend. Do a water bath, heat seal it, and you're gonna basically get it covered where it pulls out all the air pressure. You want your mason jar lids to pop. If they don't pop, it hasn't sealed properly.
Right.
Now, old-fashioned way of doing meat and everything was to use fat and let it harden to the top, and then you didn't have to seal it any other way.
Oh, really?
So if you have that extra bear fat around and you don't mind wasting it.
So you would put it in there to seal the jar.
Yeah, and it's a really effective way to seal the jar.
How long is it good for?
Well, if you did the bear fat or some kind of fat, probably not as long, maybe 6 months. But if you do the deer meat or the venison in a traditional water bath with the traditional sealing process, which only takes you could maybe do a whole deer for venison that you're going to can maybe 4 hours.
Okay.
It's going to take a bit. That'll last at least a year. Maybe
Wow.
maybe 2 years if you've got the right conditions. Out of light, heat, sunlight.
Mm-hmm.
Those old-fashioned dugout cellars, turns out those were the best thing ever. Perfectly preserved. The lady I canned with, when we lost her electricity or her air conditioning that day, we were carrying out jars of hominy we'd canned, and man, it was hot. I mean, I didn't know this lady well enough to start stripping down to the skeevies, but I was like wanting to because it was like 100 degrees in her kitchen. But after we got it done, she was like, "Erin, go put these out in the cellar." And I literally walked across the street. There's a dugout cellar in a hill. and it was nothing but dirt and wood shelves stuck in there. And that's how her family lived. And there was all kinds of venison in there.
Man, that's cool.
Canned tomatoes. And her family just kept living that way they used to 100 years ago.
That's so cool.
It works.
Yeah.
That's all does that to say is it will work for you.
Yeah. And it had to work back then, because if you're going to, preserve and keep meat and other, your crop from your farm or your garden, you don't want that to go to waste. You can't eat it all at once.
Yeah.
It had to work.
Exactly. So yeah, the step-by-step of the canning and pickling's in there. You just wanted to get it nice and hot.
Yeah.
And that way it'll create enough air pressure that when you do put the lids on and screw on the tops, eventually you'll hear a pop, 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 pop. That's a good sound.
Got it.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Wouldn't that be cool if we could take everything we foraged and what we hunted and then make a meal out of all of that
That'd be
together?
awesome.
Oh, we definitely could.
Especially if they're from the same geographical area, it's got to go well.
It would. Well, Erin, thank you so much for your time. I know we've gone long, and it's just because it's so fascinating. Like all the stuff that we've talked about, I was just like, man, this feels like I think about my family and thinking back generations of this is recipes that they may have had and would have used in their kitchens. And, some of those have survived. Some of them probably haven't survived.
Yeah.
And, that's sad in itself. But I appreciate the work that you've done to preserve what is available out there and, do the research that you've done. I'm excited to dive into this book. I think it's going to be really cool.
Thank you.
And again, just thank you for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you guys for having me and for what you're doing to help the conservation community around Northwest Arkansas. I really appreciate you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate
it.
Hey,
if Erin, if people want to get your book, where can they find it? Show it to the camera.
Well, yes. You can contact me directly, and you can always. I'm online on Facebook, Instagram, all the social medias, right? And that way I can sign it for you and mail it right to your house.
Yeah.
But also, if you just want to go and get it on Barnes and Noble online, Amazon has it. All the local Barnes and Nobles, CVS's, Walgreens, and some of the Walmarts and Sam's Clubs all around Northwest Arkansas should sell it as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right. Well, we appreciate you. And to our listeners, if you guys enjoyed this episode, send it to somebody. Send it to somebody in the Ozarks. Share the culture that is food, the storytelling, everything that we've talked about. Make sure that other people are hearing this stuff. We appreciate you guys, and we will see you on the next one.